Hello, welcome to the Fall Book Club. My name is Maverick Evans, and today we will be going through chapters 20 to 29 of A Farewell to Arms. We'll see what chapters we get to. This has been long coming. The book club got put off a little while for Rona season. I'm sure everyone knows about COVID-19 and the big hoax that was. But we're back on track for the most part. We are scheduled to meet up for the new book that we're doing, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So that'll be a lot of fun to have the whole group there. But I'll be continuing A Farewell to Arms by myself, and we'll also be going through H.G. Wells's The Invisible Man, just because I felt like it. I haven't finished it yet, but I'll be doing that solo with you guys as well. So also just a little bit of an announcement here that I always forget to make at the beginning of these videos. If you want to skip around and like to go to particular subjects, I'll be doing my best to put the timestamps and hyperlinks in the description below. So when you're watching this on YouTube or wherever it is, you can go to the description and you can find the different chapter summarizations there, and you can just skip through them. Or if you've already watched it but want to come back to something specific that was covered here today, then you can do that as well. So let's get right into it. I guess I'll read chapter 20 again, just reread this summarization so that we know where we leapt off from. Also, I would suggest that you watch the previous videos before watching this one, but I'm sure that that's pretty self-explanatory. So, chapter 20. Henry and Catherine go to the races with Helen Ferguson, whom Henry calls Fergie, and the boy who was wounded while trying to unscrew the nose cap on the shrapnel shell. It's a real bright one, that kid was. They bet on horses based on Myers' tips. Myers usually bets successfully, but shares his secrets very selectively. While watching the preparations for a race of horses that have never won a purse higher than Thousand Lyre. Catherine spies a purplish black horse that she believes has been dyed to disguise its true color. As Italian horse racing is rumored to be extremely corrupt, Catherine is sure that the horse is a champion in disguise. She and Henry bet their money on it, but win much less than expected. Catherine eventually grows tired of the crowd, and she and Henry decide to watch the remaining races by themselves. They both claim to feel better or less lonely when they are alone together. Improper matches always get along better alone and away from other friends. Yeah, that's been my experience at least. Usually, girls that I've been with that I'm not supposed to be with, that are definitely not a good match for me, always report to be much happier or more comfortable just with the two of us away from everyone else, because that's just usually your friends are not compatible or willing to alter their personality in such a way that one of the romantic interests will be. So I would be more willing to alter my personality and my behavior in an effort to appease or act in a pleasing way to my significant other, and my friends obviously don't care enough about my significant other enough to do anything of the sort, unless that's part of their personality already. So we are on to chapter 21 now. So this is new content. We'll read some of the summarization here, and then we'll talk about it. Henry's leg begins to heal and is given 3 weeks of leave before having to return to the front lines. So that's a pretty good amount of time. That's basically like a vacation for him. So I'm sure that in the book they were pretty rejoiceful whenever they got that news. Although Henry maintains the opinion and desire to go back to the front lines as soon as possible. So this is not a good news for him. But I'm sure Catherine is happy about it. Catherine says that she will come with him on his leave, and then drops a big one on him. She is 3 months pregnant. Oh my. Both of them are not happy about this, but Henry claims to be excited about the prospect of fatherhood, despite the untimely and unadvantageous situation that they're in, especially socially. And we've talked about the social the social inclinations, expectations that would have been present during this time, and this would not have been very good. Children out of wedlock, very frowned upon. No, bad. Catherine voices her worries about trapping Henry and worries their trials and all this will be too much. So right off the bat, Catherine is just like, oh my gosh, you're excited about this? I think it's going to be way too hard, which for me would probably be, boom, red flag. Catherine, the mother of my future child, is not excited and thinks that it's all going to be too difficult, which, granted, given the circumstances, I'm sure that it would have been extremely daunting to consider such a task, especially since they're given their situation. But she had said previously in the book that she didn't really even care that much about it. So, Catherine's kind of wishy-washy because she she's definitely wants to have her cake and eat it too, right? I think is the saying. She wants to be in this relationship with Henry, but at the same time wants to adhere to some of the traditional, practices, different social norms. She doesn't want to be taken to a hotel and hidden away as if she were some kind of prostitute. But at the same time, she wants to get down and groovy. She wants to shag with Henry late at night in one of the hospital beds. So I don't know what to make of her her attitude toward the situations all the time. I can't tell if Catherine is genuinely worried about the trials that are ahead, or if she's just trying to make excuses to try and lead toward her inching toward the back door, so to speak. I don't know. Henry responds to Catherine's worries with a stellar quote, which has stood out for me because this is why I put it down, from an unknown author, by saying, "A coward dies 1,000 deaths, the brave but one." I don't know about you, but that is a killer quote. And Catherine replies saying, "Intelligent brave men die, perhaps 2,000 deaths, but never mention them." And these are awesome too. A kind of point where I feel like the characters kind of say these quotes a little bit out of character. I wouldn't expect Catherine to reply with such a beautiful line. I mean, she's not super well spoken throughout the book, but she's also I don't know. It just seems like one of those events, in To Kill a Mockingbird, when Scout talks, it's clearly not a kid, it's just the author talking. This is kind of an example of, I think, some of the themes being carried through the characters' dialogue that is not accurate or representative of the actual characters that are speaking them. But they do a great job. They're beautiful too. When Catherine replies saying, "Intelligent, brave men die perhaps 2,000 deaths but never mention them," works really well in conjunction with the first quote that Henry said, "A coward dies 1,000 deaths, the brave but one." So essentially, these intelligent, brave men do endure the pain and suffering that life has to bring them, and they're not. I guess it would mean that they're not immune to fear, but rather go forthrightly and stand in the face of opposition with bravery. They are stoic in nature and say nothing of the fear and suffering that they endure, and so in effect they appear as if they only suffer one death, but in actuality have suffered many, many more than even that of a coward. So some good poetic type dialogue going on here, in my opinion, which is why I put the quotes down, because they made me look twice. Okay, chapter 22. The next morning it begins to rain, and big surprise, Henry is diagnosed with, yep, you got it, jaundice. Oh my gosh, and who would have saw this coming? Oh my gosh, we would have never thought that old Henry would have got diagnosed with the old jaundice. It's not like he's been drinking since the book started. Oh wait, yes he has. He has been drinking the entire time. Miss Van Campen finds empty liquor bottles in Henry's room and blames alcoholism for his condition, which I think that Miss Van Campen is onto something. She accuses him of purposefully making himself ill in order to avoid being sent back to the front, which, according to what I can tell from the book, is not true. I don't think that he intentionally drank himself to jaundice so that he could avoid the front lines. It's said multiple times in the book that he wishes to be back to the front lines as quick as possible, which is why he had sought out a second opinion for a surgeon and had taken up the surgeon's second opinion, saying that he could have a surgery the next day and that it would only take a couple weeks for recovery. So this was not true for her to make a claim about. Little did she know, he's just a bloody alcoholic. Yeah, exactly. He's just an alcoholic. He was just drinking a ton because, he really likes, I don't know what is it? It's not Moscato that he was drinking, but I'll think of it later. She orders his liquor stash to be taken away and promises to file a report that will deny him his leave, which she successfully does. So, which also, I don't know... I don't know how this is going to work out, but I feel like he shouldn't return to the front lines while he has major jaundice. He really almost dies from this condition. The whole yellowing of the skin, the liver is dying pretty much. I think that at some point, which is really cool here too, because I'm down with alternative medicine or functional medicine, if you will. And one of the treatments, too, for many different forms of inflammation is vitamin D treatments. So I think at one point in the book, the nurses put him out in the sun in order to try and treat his jaundice. They state that they don't know why it works, but it does. And so, and the reason for that is because the sunlight is allowing the body to manufacture and produce vitamin D, which helps with the jaundice. So there you go. It's a pretty brief chapter, chapter 22. All right, we're on to chapter 23. We're getting this. Henry gets ready to go back to the front. He says his goodbyes at the hospital and heads out to the streets. While walking by a cafe, he spots Catherine through a window and asks for her to join him. Another one of those really cool, convenient type things. I'm not sure how big this city is for it to be practical or reasonable that he would have encountered her in one of the cafes. I'm sure that the city is relatively small. They pass two lovebirds standing outside a cathedral, and Henry says, "They're like us." Catherine gloomily responds, "Nobody is like us." They enter a gun shop where, and this I feel, of course, the connotations and the inflection of the lines are hard to decipher through the book, but I would have to surmise that since she responded gloomily, that she said nobody is like us in a more negative way, that no one is like us, and with the kind of subtext that I wish we weren't like we are, and nobody would like to be like us. So they continue walking. They enter a gun shop where Henry buys a new pistol and several ammunition cartridges to replace the ones that he had lost in his accident on the front. On the street, they kiss like the lovers outside the cathedral did, which is a very romantic, very nice, saucy little scene going on, very classic romance. Henry suggests that they go somewhere private, and Catherine agrees for the sexy time. So they're about to get down and go shag once again. Lots of that in this book. They find a hotel. Despite Henry making an effort to lodge with a nice hotel and purchase a fancy nightgown for Catherine, she still feels like a prostitute. Like I had said before, she doesn't want to be, lugged around to hotels in private and treated like a prostitute. Which is weird because I'm just like, you had already kind of shagged with the dude in the hospital beds late at night, but whatever. I mean, we'll just pass that up. So after dinner, however, they both feel fine. I'm sure the sex, cigarettes, and alcohol really did the trick in relaxing the both of them. So Henry utters the lines, quote, "But at my back I always hear Time's winged chariot hurrying near," which Catherine recognizes as a couplet from the poetry of Andrew Marvell. Really nice to see culturally that it was normal for individuals to be able to quote poetry. Not only quote it, but others identify who said it. Very, very interesting. I feel like that no one often reads poetry. I haven't heard very many people quote poetry ever. So, I wish that was something that was in today's culture as well. Henry asks Catherine how she will manage having the baby. She assures him that she will be fine and that she will have to set up a nice home for Henry by the time he returns. So they're kind of planning out what they're going to do when when he gets back from the front, and whenever the war is over, or whenever he, is able to come back home for a long stint of time. So at this point in the chapter, it kind of seems like we're looking up toward the sky. We're having some kind of hope for a good future between these two characters. So things seem to be looking up. Let's see. I'll take a drink here. That's some good kombucha. All right. Chapter 24. Outside, Henry calls for a carriage to bring him and Catherine from the hotel to the train station. He gets out at the station and sends her on to the hospital. He begs her to take care of herself and little Catherine. There is a small commotion on the crowded train because Henry has arranged for a machine gunner to save him a seat. A tall, gaunt captain protests. Eventually, Henry offers the offended captain his seat and sleeps on the floor. So this is a bit of a unfortunate happening. I don't really know what to make of it, either culturally or institutionally. I know that this is kind of an event that Henry breaks on, he gives on, he concedes ground, because they're both captains. Henry is a captain, and I'm guessing that the other captain is of the same rank as him. And I don't know if there are any rules mentioned in the book, like it's against the rules or policy of the train station or something like that to have, some other soldier paid to go in and save you a seat on the train, because these trains are often, packed very early. He would have had to get there an hour or more in advance in order to save his own seat, and he would have rather spend that time with Catherine instead, and so he paid out of pocket for the machine gunner. Luckily, there's still room in the train for him to sleep on the floor. Well, he says, well, if you want to make such a ruckus about it, I guess I want to sleep anyways, so I'll be on the floor here. Chapter 24, relatively uneventful, more of a situational movement forward, not a ton of character development, although we do see a bit of Henry's agreeable nature whenever it comes to small squabbles. Chapter 25. So after returning to Gorizia, Henry has a talk with the town major about the war. It was a bad summer, the major says. The major is pleased to learn that Henry received his decorations and decides that Henry was lucky to get wounded when he did. The major admits that he is tired of the war and states that he doesn't believe that he would come back if he were given leave from the front. Henry then goes to find Rinaldi, and while he waits for his friend, he thinks about Catherine. Of course, we just have some more lackadaisical daydreaming from Henry about his beloved mother of his child. So Rinaldi comes into the room, and he is glad to see Henry. He examines his friend's wounded knee and exclaims that it is a crime that Henry was sent back into battle. Rinaldi asks if Henry has married and if he is in love. He asks if Catherine is good in bed, which offends Henry, who says that he holds certain subjects sacred, which is an interesting word for Henry to be using because, as we've discussed previously, he seems to be on the side of agnosticism. He's unsure of whether or not he is spiritual or religious or a man of faith. He seems to be drawn toward conversations with individuals or men of faith to speak about the subject, and he's kind of inquisitive of the matter. So it's interesting, I think, from maybe a psychological or psychoanalytical perspective, that Henry would use the term sacred or keep something sacred. I think that's part of his unconscious desire to become a man of faith, and that he wishes that he could hold hope as firmly as those other men of faith do. They drink a toast to Catherine and go down to dinner. Rinaldi makes fun of the priest in an attempt to cheer Henry up. So this is again just another event where where the priest is always getting made fun of. It seems like a common theme. Obviously, this is post-Enlightenment. A lot of individuals here in this portion of the world are agnostic, or they're unbelieving in any kind of God. Interesting. Another thing here, Rinaldi again is acting kind of like a woman. I don't know. It's just so odd. I suppose that they're just really close friends. I guess that's the case. They're really close friends. But he always freaks out. He flips his wig anytime that he sees Henry hurt, and just feigns over him as if he was, I don't know. It's just very odd. So we'll continue on. Chapter 26. After dinner, Henry talks with the priest. So here again is this interest to speak to a man of faith, rather than some of the other rascals that make up the military and his fellow comrades. The priest thinks that the war will end soon, though he cannot say why he thinks so. Just a bit of an intuition. Henry remains skeptical, as he always does. This is one of his many defining characteristics is skepticism. And the priest notices a change in the men, quoting the major, whom he describes as gentle. Henry speculates that defeat has made the men more gentle, and points the priest to the story of Jesus Christ, who, Henry suggests, was mild because he had been beaten down. Henry claims that he no longer believes in victory. At the end of the evening, when the priest asks what Henry does believe in, he responds, in sleep. So obviously I think that we can see these statements that Henry makes as kinds of projections. He seems to, first of all, Jesus Christ is a character or an icon that many choose to or attempt or end up unconsciously identifying with. So I think that Henry, too, identifies with Jesus Christ and has seen in the historical events of his crucifixion some kind of relation with his own life. So Henry, I think, in nature is also mild. We've seen this too with his more agreeable nature whenever he encounters the captain, as well as other squabbles that he enters into with characters in previous chapters. I think that Henry believes that he's been beaten down, and that accounts for his mild nature. And this is further cemented by the evidence that he provides whenever he responds to the priest's question to him, what does he believe in? He says in sleep, because he's tired, he's beaten down. As a result, he's mild and in need of rest. So a good bit of character development here in chapter 26. We'll move on to chapter 27. The next morning, Henry travels to some small mountains called the Baiancisa, which I'm most likely mispronouncing. The Baiancisa. Henry meets a man named Gino, who tells him about the terrifying guns that the Austrians have. The two of them discuss the Italian army's position against Croatian troops. Gino predicts that there will be nowhere for the Italians to go should the Austrians decide to attack. He claims that the summer's losses were not in vain, and Henry falls silent, thinking how words like sacred, glorious, and sacrifice embarrass him, which is an interesting thought to have, because as we mentioned in the previous chapter, Henry claim to have kept such sexual intimacies as sacred, sacred secrets. And yet, these words seem to embarrass him, although he is not above using them. He believes that concrete facts, such as the names of villages and the numbers of streets, have more meaning than such abstractions. That is to say that these abstractions have no meaning, because there's hardly any value or meaning in the net numbers of streets. So because there are so many villages and so many numbers and streets in existence. That night the rain comes down hard and the enemy begins a bombardment. In the beginning, the Italians learn that the attacking forces include Germans, and they become very afraid. They have had little contact with the Germans in the war and would prefer to keep it that way. The next night, word arrives that the Italian line has been broken. The forces begin a large-scale retreat. The troops slowly move out. As they come to the town of Gorizia, Henry sees women from the soldiers' whorehouse being loaded into a truck. Bonello, one of the drivers under Henry's command, offers to go with the women. At the villa, Henry discovers that Rinaldi has taken off for the hospital. Everyone else has evacuated too. Henry, Bonello, and 2 other drivers, Piani and Amo, rest and eat before resuming the retreat. So, this is chapter 27 is mostly just like a lot of action, and not like action in like as if like fights and stuff, but clearly just a series of physical events going on to explain the current status of the war at the moment, how the fronts are being affected, how Austria and Germany are moving in, the fear that seems to be rising up inside of the Italians and their allied forces, in anticipation of these greater militant forces coming in, and the situation physically concerning Henry and his comrades. So, that's just the situation as it is right now. So there's a little bit of stuff in there about how Henry feels, but for the most part, the last half of chapter 27 is just situational. Chapter 28, the men drive. This is actually, we're getting excited here. Things are getting a little crazy. Things get wild here. The men drive slowly through the town, forming an endless column of retreating soldiers and vehicles. Henry takes a turn sleeping. Shortly after he wakes, the column stalls. They're driving in a huge line right now. A large caravan, and there's all kinds of different trucks and ambulances and different militant vehicles that are driving here. And at some point, the caravan stalls for such a long time that whoever's driving can take a nap because they'll be stopped for so long. Assumedly because the mud that they're driving in, occasionally a vehicle will get stuck, and that stalls the entire caravan. So, Henry takes a turn sleeping. Shortly after he wakes, the column stalls. Henry exits his vehicle to check on his men. He discovers 2 engineering officers in Bonello's car and 2 women with Amo. The girls seem suspicious of Amo's intentions, but he eventually, if crudely, convinces them that he means them no harm. Henry returns to Piani's car and falls asleep. I think it's at this point that some of the men, one of Henry's men, grabs the thigh of one of the whores, and that's kind of how he communicates with them, because I don't believe they speak the same language. And I'm also not sure what language that they speak, but that's kind of how they communicate. There's a bit of non-verbal communication going on, and they are uneasy, but kind of get the message from the soldiers that they are not going to rape them or kill them or anything, but they will assault them a little bit. So that night, the column. Hold on. Henry returns to Piani's car and falls asleep. His dreams are of Catherine, and he speaks aloud to her. That night, columns of peasants join the retreating army in the early morning. Henry and his men decide to separate from the column and take a small road going north. They stop briefly at an abandoned farmhouse and eat a large breakfast before continuing their journey. And here's a note. this is where things get serious. Yeah. So this is a really pleasant kind of scene going on here. Very classically, it's almost like a movie in your head. I mean, of course, he does such a good job with, a very well-balanced amount of imagery as well as dialogue between the characters, and it's very well done. This chapter kind of grips you in my opinion. Chapter 29, as we go on, Amos's car gets stuck in the soft ground, and the men are forced to cut brush hurriedly to place under the tires for traction. Henry orders the 2 engineering sergeants, not technically under his command, riding with Bonello, to help. Afraid of being overtaken by the enemy, they refuse and try to leave. Henry draws his gun and shoots one of them. The other escapes. Bonello takes Henry's pistol and finishes off the wounded soldier. The men use branches, twigs, and even clothing to create traction, but the car sinks further into the mud. They continue in the other vehicles, but soon get stuck again. Henry gives some money to the 2 girls traveling with Amo and sends them off to a nearby village. The men continue to Udine on foot. So this is probably one of the most memorable chapters so far, especially, and possibly one of the most memorable chapters, probably top 5 memorable chapters that occurs in the book. And at least for me, because of the brutality of the events here, when you're reading for the first time, you're just not sure how far this situation is going to escalate. And so whenever the engineering sergeants, which by the way I do not believe are a part of his military, they're not U.S. troops. There's some other Allied force, and I can't remember which Allied army they belong to, but they are not Italian. And for this reason, they do not believe that they have to take any orders from a higher-ranking captain. Even if he is higher-ranking, he's not part of their army, despite them being allies. Well, Henry, being the ranking officer in their group, instructs them to cut brush and help them get the cars out, which I'm confident that if they had their help, they would have been able to get the cars out. Losing two manpower on that was terrible, which is why they got stalled and stuck here, which just perpetuates their issues, spirals them out of control. So you don't know how far this is going to escalate. And you sure as hell don't assume that it's going to escalate where it does. So Henry, first of all, I admire him for the stone-cold leadership here. I wish I could find more information on how often this sort of event occurs, and whether or not inside of the U.S. military code these kinds of events are permitted. I doubt that they are, because I would assume that there's some kind of due process that needs to occur before we can try and accuse someone of not treachery, but and not perjury, but whatever it is that soldiers commit. The word escapes me. Treason, right? So he's committed treason, and we would have to bring them in front of a judge, a military jury or whatnot, to try and accuse them of such a crime. So he just executes this guy, and they run away. He shoots one of them, and then he wounds him, and then Bonello walks up to Henry and says, "You want me to finish him off?" And Henry hands his pistol over to Bonello, and he just walks over to the engineer and blows his face off. And it is a very striking scene, very interesting, shocking to say the least, and one that sticks with me more than any other chapter so far. So yeah, I don't know. I wish I knew more about that, but I don't. And so yeah, we will. Then here we are. We're on from 29 to 30. They're traveling to Udine on foot. Crossing a bridge, Henry sees a German staff car crossing another bridge nearby. Amo soon spots a heavily armed bicycle troop. Fearing capture, Henry and the men decide to avoid the main road, which the retreat follows, and head for the smaller secondary roads. So they have German forces right on their heels, which is why that they were moving out of that area to begin with, because the fronts were being moved. They're in retreat at the moment. So they start down an embankment and are shot at. A bullet hits Amo and kills him instantly. Realizing that their friend has been shot by their own troops, the Italian rear guard, Henry and his men realize that they are in more danger than they would be facing the enemy. They look for a place to hide until dark and come across an abandoned farmhouse. Henry camps out in the hayloft while Piani and Bonello search for food. Piani returns alone and reports that Bonello, fearing death, left the farm in hopes of being taken prisoner and thereby escaping death. The men hide in the barn until nightfall and then set out to rejoin the Italians. They come upon a large gathering of soldiers where officers are being separated and interrogated for the treachery. And I just said treachery, perjury. Treason is the word here for their treason that led to an Italian defeat. Suddenly, 2 men from the battle police seize hold of Henry. He watches as the lieutenant colonel is led away, questioned, and then shot. Sensing the opportunity to escape, Henry runs for the water and dives in. And as he swims away, he hears shots, but as he gains distance from shore, the sounds of gunfire fade. This is again another very intense chapter. The kind of sense that you would get in a movie where there's been shots fired and your vision is flashed and bright and your pupils are trying to accommodate the bright light and your ears are ringing and you can't hear much, everything is muffled. That's kind of like the overwhelming effect that this particular chapter has on you as well. When we ramp up from chapter 29 into 30, you just can't expect anything to get any worse. Whenever Amo is shot to death on accident by the Italian rear guard, their own people, how tragic it is to lose one of your own fellow soldiers under your command and to your own forces, to friendly fire. Terrible. I mean, it's gut-wrenching whenever it happens in the book and you're reading it for the very first time. And then the frustration that you feel whenever you find out that Bonello, one of the more beloved characters that we get to interact with here, was so rearing and ready, so loyal to Henry as his captain that he would offer to execute another soldier, even in a more dubious situation here, whether or not he was right to do so or not. He was the one who offered to execute that soldier. And now he has feared death to such a point that he has rather choose to become a prisoner of war, which, mind you, I'm sure that stories of the prisoners of war taken in by the Germans, if any, were absolutely terrible. So I'm not sure how his fear of death it must have been immense in order to overpower the fear of the torture, pain, and suffering that he would experience as a prisoner of war under the German forces. So it's terribly frustrating too, because you see in just a few moments during chapter 30 that Henry and Piani are able to make it back to the Italian retreat. They make it back to the line, and this is where things get very, very frustrating. So it seems odd that this would happen, but when they're returning, he was not with any of his soldiers because he was separated from the retreat. This was interpreted by the Italian soldiers here, basically the Italian police, and I'm not sure of the exact terminology or titles that they carried here for this part. but they interpreted as desertion and treason, that he would attempt to escape or leave his men, that he was a disservice to the Italian army, and that he had deserted his men, and in turn had deserted the Italian forces. And so he was to be questioned of his guilt, and without a judge or jury or due process, he would be put to death by pistol. And so he witnesses this happen to other officers, some higher ranking than he, and seizes a window of opportunity to escape inside of a cold river, fastly rolling. And so whenever he does this, he gets out and rips the stars off of his jacket, rips the bars off, and puts them in his pocket so that they can't identify him as a captain, and makes way to safety, narrowly escaping death. So he has now escaped his own forces, the German forces, the Austrian forces that are coming up fast from the rear, and he has now had to escape his own military. The Italian army that he swore to serve as an American is now attempting to kill him. So he really has no refuge here. And this is a very anxious and anxiety-filled portion of the story, and it does not let up from here on, to be quite frank. It only gets worse. So I hope that you guys enjoyed these summarizations, and we will be sure to cover the last 10 or 11 chapters, 10 or 11 or 12, something like that. I think it's 12. The next 12 chapters, which will be 11 or 12, I don't know, which I believe will be chapters 31 to 42, if I can remember it. I don't have the book on me right now. But we'll be doing those hopefully next week, and we'll get these out, including the Invisible Man book club discussions, and then, of course, this weekend, Saturday at around 12:30, hopefully 12:30, I believe, we will be starting our new conversation over One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So we look forward to seeing you guys there. If you like this video, I'm glad. So I think that's all for today. I hope that you learned something. I know I sure did, and I've been having a blast reading some of these stories and sharing it with you. So yeah, a bit of a shorter one today. We're very systematic on how we were doing it, and hope you like the new bookshelf. All right, you guys have a great day, and I'll see you later.